I must admit, I myself do not fully believe in this story. I would call it a typical scenario for an American horror movie. But I heard it from my own grandfather, who is still alive, thank God, and does not refuse his words. Admittedly, he even acted as the editor-in-chief and censor of this story. In general, my grandfather is a real Siberian, originally from a remote taiga village in the north of the Krasnoyarsk territory. This is not Norilsk yet, of course, but frosts under -45 will not surprise anyone there either. So, as I said, this village was small, everyone knew each other. The main fishery here centered around the forestry enterprise. The peasants felled the taiga, worked at the sawmill, and lived there. And so, it means that there was somehow an emergency at this production. One local drunk was crushed by a tree. This man, to tell the truth, was empty, useless. I lived my life, I didn't get a stake or a yard. He only drank and harassed the old mother while she was alive. And as she died, so he completely flew off the rails. If it's not a tree, it's all the same, either he froze somewhere drunk or his liver would have refused because the human body cannot digest so much poison all the time. The man sat down and thought, to say everything as it is, they will put the foreman. And he has 7 shops at home, but is he to blame if this drunkard himself climbed where he shouldn't? In short, they blamed everything on an accident. And this Ephraim was buried at the local cemetery. They were buried for their money, the artel was thrown off. And where did the hard workers get the extra money? So we tried to save on everything. In general, even without a coffin, he was buried. They just wrapped the body with sheets and buried it. It's creepy, of course, and not in a Christian way, but I think you understand why exactly this happened. No one cried much at his grave either and did not utter heartfelt speeches. Buried, stood, but went about their business. Ephraimka was a shoddy man, but still a man. It can be seen that they angered him by burying him like that, like a dog. And from that time on, all sorts of villainies began to occur in our village. At first, the dogs died in one night. Read at half the village. In the evening they went to bed at night, everything was as usual, and in the morning they began. The dogs were right on a leash and stiffened. Bad conversations started. But the local veterinarian assured that it was all because of the canine distemper. Like, the epidemic has gone, so your aces have died. Although, of course, it's hard to believe that there are so many dogs at once and everything is important in one night. Then from Vasilik, the one who took over the organization of the funeral of the Ephraimkins, someone knocked out all the windows of the house. Moreover, the stones with which they were beaten were not found. It was as if someone was beating with a stick from the street, but there were no traces nearby. But this is still half the trouble, then the fires started. Then one shed will burst into flames, then another hut will burst into flames. There has never been such a thing, and here there is some kind of attack. And finally, the most terrible thing that has already overwhelmed the patience of local residents is when our foreman Anatoly personally saw Ephraimka. It was night, he says. He couldn't sleep. I got up to smoke and drink some water. He went out into the hall. Suddenly, he hears a dog barking. Yes, he barks like he's afraid of something. He can bark at a bear like that, realizing that death is very close. He pulled back the curtain peering out of the window and then almost fell all the way, shying away from him in horror. Efremkino's face, pale as a wall, looked straight at him. Moreover, he says, as soon as he realized that Anatolik saw him, he was already distorted in an evil grin. How not to believe such a person? He couldn't just make that up. In general, the peasants began to think what they should do with it. Some suggested digging up Ephraimka and burning it so that there would be no trace of him. Others to drive an aspen stake, they say, from the wandering dead since ancient times so escaped. But they decided to sing a funeral service for the sinner so that his soul would find peace. They brought a priest from a neighboring village, and so that you understand, it's 40 miles along the taiga gullies. He sang it, read prayers for a long time. In general, as it seemed to us, he treated his duties carefully. And no, it seems that life has calmed down again in our village and has entered the usual channel. Our grandmothers, as soon as they got to the service in the temple, began to put candles for the repose of Ephraim. No one else seems to have encountered anything so demonic. People forgot themselves. And once they forgot, they stopped believing. They began to say that they say all this is your village fiction, and there was nothing like that at all. And how was it not when we ourselves saw all this with our own eyes?